Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. Amber Heard, what is she? Part 4. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We've already examined in the first 3 parts of the series the background about Amber Heard's early life, the nature of her parents, and her career. We have seen the seeds that suggest that there may well be the potential for narcissism. It's clear that her father was one. Of course, just because a parent is a narcissist, it does not automatically follow that the child will become a narcissist. The genetic predisposition may not be passed on, or even if it is, the child might not be subjected to the lack of control environment, either because there generally isn't one created, or more usually, there is an intervening influence that shields the child from this lack of control environment. We now turn to more of the behaviours of Amber Heard to gain more evidence to understand what she is. I will be addressing the material, the evidence that has been provided in the course of the current trial, but in order to provide a full picture, it's worth going back and examining some evidence that has come forward previously. First of all, the evidence that was provided by Heard's personal assistants in the first defamation case which Depp lost. Now, whilst the judge determined that Kate James departed in acrimonious circumstances, and therefore he treated her evidence with caution, nevertheless, we are able to make our own assessment as to the veracity of this information, and, on the basis that it is accurate, it creates a picture alongside, of course, all the other evidence that has come forward. It's worth bearing in mind, of course, that every human being can act out, so to describe. Every human being is capable of losing their temper, of using physical violence, of using nasty words, giving somebody a silent treatment, of cheating, of destroying property. Every human being has that potential, and indeed, some human beings can engage in such behaviours, but that does not make them a narcissist. It is a consequence of the erosion of emotional empathy caused by an external stressor. If you'd like to understand more about that, I direct you to go to the Knowledge Vault and obtain Why Am I Behaving Like a Narcissist? This will explain for you in detail why people act out in such circumstances, and often causes people to fear that they are the narcissist. Kate James previously accused Amber Heard of stealing her sexual assault story, character trait acquisition. She claimed that Amber Heard used her story and made her own twists and turns before narrating it to the world. Character trait acquisition used for the assertion of control. Just not that. The assistants also accused Amber Heard of sending her abusive texts late at night on several occasions. Malign hoovers, insult, provocation. In evidence given at the time, remotely from Los Angeles, Kate James said that she had regularly received a barrage of drunken, abusive, and incoherent text messages from Heard between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Lack of boundary recognition, sending them at that time of night. Lack of emotional empathy for sending messages at such a late time and not thinking about the effect that it would have upon them, the recipient. Insult. Now, of course, it might be that Heard was only sending these as a consequence of her own erosion of emotional empathy caused by the fact that she was drunk. Many of you listening will know that you have perhaps sent those cringe-worthy text messages when you imbibed a little too much, only to regret it the following morning. Sometimes that happens. And it might be that Amber Heard did this because the alcohol, which is an external stressor, drunkenness, reduced her emotional empathy for the assistant. Kate James explained, with regard to the 3 years that she worked with Amber Heard, She claimed that her ex-boss always made derogatory remarks about Johnny Depp, insult, lack of emotional empathy, provocation. The PA said, as per a report by The Blast, she was always blind with anger. Then nobody could talk to her sensibly anymore. I was to blame for everything that went wrong. Blame shifting. Not just that, the report adds that Amber Heard was trying to be like Johnny Depp in every possible way, from having a similar dressing style to a house. She wanted it all in the same way. Mirroring. And there has been some mirroring taking place in the trial, which we will address further down the line when we get onto the current trial. In her second witness statement that was provided to the court in the first defamation action, James said that she had been the victim of a rape in Brazil when she was in her 20s, and that the experience had haunted her ever since. When she read Heard's submissions, James said, "To my utter shock and dismay, I discovered that Ms. Heard had in fact stolen my sexual violence conversation with her and twisted it into her own story to benefit herself. That is classic character trait acquisition. This, of course, caused me extreme distress and outrage that she would dare to attempt to use the most harrowing experience of my life as her own narrative. Sense of entitlement, lack of boundary recognition, absence of emotional empathy." James told the court that although she had been subpoenaed to give evidence, she was doing so because she is a sexual violence survivor and it's a very serious matter, and it's serious to take that stance if you are not one. Referring to Heard's drinking habits, James said in a witness statement Amber would drink vast quantities of red wine each night. Drunkenness is an exhibition of a lack of accountability for behaviour. In a final comment, James said Heard was probably the least known person she had been employed by in Hollywood. Also, in the original defamation case, we heard from Ben King, who looked after the homes when the couple stayed in various places. He said that he noticed on one occasion what he thought were cuts on Amber Heard's arm when they returned to Los Angeles. King, who gave a second statement for the trial at the beginning of the trial, had said he'd been told when interviewed for the job that Mr. Depp was teetotal, having previously been a drinker. He told the court the only drug he had seen the Pirates of the Caribbean star take was cannabis. He seemed to smoke cannabis sometimes around the house. He also said Depp was always polite. We, of course, will be analysing Johnny Depp's behaviour separately. In his first statement, King, whose role was described as house manager or butler, said, "I frequently witness Ms. Heard goading and attempting to provoke Mr. Depp. I never witnessed Mr. Depp be violent or unkind towards Ms. Heard, or, indeed, anyone else." Provocation by Ms. Heard, attempt to assert control. King said he had not seen Depp drink during their stay in London. It was Miss Heard who was drinking the wine, King said. I believe she would regularly drink at least 1 or 2 bottles a night. Drunkenness, lack of accountability. I made a tally of the bottles of wine left on the counter or in the bins when I arrived each morning. I was usually the first one there. I would often see Miss Heard drinking wine. When the couple were in Australia, where the court had heard they clashed, the house they stayed in was wrecked. Heard would harangue Mr. Depp during the arguments, which seemed worse than they had been in London, King said. Argumentativeness, which is a narcissistic trait and a form of manipulation. On the flight back from Australia, King said in his second statement, I did notice on one arm that she had a couple of marks which looked like cuts in fairly uniform lines as a sort of diagonal angle downwards. I recall saying to her when we landed in Los Angeles that she may want to put her sleeve down as there might be paparazzi in the airport. She did not refuse, but she chose not to. That suggests a rejection of the threat to control posed by his suggestion and a potential need to want to show the injury. During the same flight, King said, Heard turned to him and asked, Have you ever been so angry with someone that you just lost it? He said he had not. Demonstration of fury. Further evidence that arose previously came from Kevin Murphy, Depp's estate manager. He gave evidence telling the court that Heard had threatened him with losing his job, use of threat, absence of emotional empathy, if he did not perjure himself and make a false statement about the couple taking their pet dogs into Australia without having the correct vaccines. The issue of the arrival of the two dogs, Pistol and Boo, in Australia in April 2015 turned into an international media furore after Depp was told he could face up to 10 years in prison for bringing them without the correct health certificates. Murphy admitted that he had signed a declaration for the courts in Australia that contained statements that were not entirely true, and said it was because he had been threatened with losing his job by Heard. Amber wielded a lot of power and might make my life miserable, Murphy told the court. Now, this was all evidence that was provided in the first defamation trial, and although, of course, Depp lost that, that doesn't mean that this evidence has no weight associated to it. 3 people who are all testifying to the behaviours of Amber Heard, and from that we can see a lack of accountability as a consequence of the level of drinking that she engaged in, the repeated provocation that she exhibited towards Johnny Depp, a lack of accountability for her behaviour, an absence of emotional empathy, operating with a sense of entitlement, a lack of boundary recognition, blame-shifting behaviours. Now, it might be, as I've explained, of course, that her behaviours were occasioned by external stresses that caused her to act out in this fashion. However, 3 people, different occasions interacting with her, it starts to paint a pattern of behaviour. And that is what we look for in such instances, patterns of behaviour over a period of time that demonstrate a sustained form of activity, conduct, and behaviour from which to make the analysis. In part 5, we continue the analysis as more evidence starts to point in a particular direction, as we turn to other instances that provide us with a picture of what Amber Heard is. Join me there.